Okay, our next speaker is Gus McCarthy. Gus McCarthy is a professional planner who has in excess of 30 years experience in both private practice and local authorities. He's worked as a senior planner in both Galway County Council and Galway City Council prior to establishing his private practice in 2000. Gus has experience in being an expert witness in legal and arbitration cases for several road schemes, extensive experience in preparation of all types of development plans, local area plans and planning master plans. He's retained as planning advisor for development programs of large organisations and has been a lead planning consultant in a wide range of retail, commercial and residential projects throughout the country. Today Gus will reflect widely on the Irish planning system, assessing its strengths and weaknesses.
Thank you, Shane. I don't have any movies to show you, I'm afraid, unlike Patricia. What I'm going to cover today are just some recent developments and recent changes in the planning system. And whereas Patricia dealt with a specific aspect of the planning process, those of you who were in next door this morning for the presentations will have seen one of the slides that Tomas Kelly had in his presentation, which identified the planning system as one of the areas, one area of the construction sector which has scored the least in terms of satisfaction or fit for purpose. And I suppose what we've seen recently are quite a lot of changes in planning legislation, which are effectively patching up a system that is really in need of a major overhaul. We have new planning legislation now coming out every few months, trying to remedy issues that has arisen with the various aspects of the planning process. Tomas's presentation also gave us an overview of some of what's happening around the country in terms of planning applications and where the applications are being made and the types of development for which the applications are being made, and how that coincides with the populations in those regions. So what I'm just going to go through very briefly is Project Ireland 2040, which is the new national planning framework, which has replaced the National Spatial Strategy, the Planning and Development, Housing and Residential Tenancies Act 2016. This is legislation which was brought in to fast-track the planning process and deliver housing to address the housing crisis. And then some of the specific areas that are covered under that. And then we have the Planning and Development Regulations, which have just been published, allowing the conversion to residential use of shops and offices in towns and villages without having to go through the planning process. Both the items 2 and 3 here are specifically aimed at fast-tracking the delivery of housing, which is one of the biggest challenges that the country faces. And then the fourth item is basically to do with the legal reforms in the legal system. Most of you will be familiar with what has happened with the Apple project near Athenry recently, which went through the planning process, and after a lengthy planning and appeals process, which didn't take an unusually long time, it ended up being subject to a judicial review, which has delayed the project for twice the amount of time, in fact, that it took to get through the planning process, has created huge uncertainty in terms of whether that project will proceed. And in fact, at this point, we don't know if in fact it will proceed. So that has given rise to issues with the legal system and challenges to planning decisions through the legal system when they've gone through the planning process. This didn't arise as a result of the Apple project alone. These problems have been around now for some time, but it's only when there's a major high-profile project such as the Apple project, which has done significant damage to Ireland's reputation, as a place to invest. So Project Ireland 2040, which is the national planning framework, and I suppose really all I want to say on this slide is that unlike the previous national spatial strategy, which really wasn't implemented to any significant degree for a number of reasons. Number one, I suppose we just weren't ready in Ireland for a national planning strategy. Secondly, and probably most importantly, there was no alignment between the National Development Plan and the National Spatial Strategy. You can only implement a strategy if you have the means and the finance to implement it, as well as, of course, the political will. And the two weren't aligned previously, whereas this time they are being aligned. And if you recall, shortly after the National Spatial Strategy was adopted, the biggest decision, I suppose, that has been taken in the recent history in terms of influencing where people would live and the distribution of population was the decentralization of government services. And in fact, it didn't coincide at all with the National Spatial Strategy. More development took place in centres outside of those that were identified in the National Spatial Strategy than took place in those that were identified, which I suppose tells us something about the level of commitment or the lack of commitment to the National Spatial Strategy. So we're obviously hoping that it'll be a little bit different this time round. The National Planning Framework is the top tier. It's just one level. It's a very high level exercise. There are a number of levels to come. There are the regional strategies, and then there are local plans, all of which have to align with this new national planning framework. So for the regions, the most significant stage is yet to come, and there will be metropolitan area plans for the urban areas that have been identified in the framework. These are some of the key the facts which influenced the national planning framework. You have where Ireland ranks in terms of its economic output. We're one of the top economies worldwide. We obviously are experiencing significant population growth. We have issues in terms of education and capacity of the education sector. And some commentators have suggested that, in fact, the national planning framework is not nearly ambitious enough, and that the population growth that it is based on is similar to what we experienced during the recession. So that it should be much more ambitious, both in terms of the population projections and in terms of the level of investment. There is a view that we're going through an unprecedented period of investment, foreign direct investment, and that we should capitalise on that and invest more in infrastructure to prepare Ireland for a period when we might not be able to attract the same level of foreign direct investment mainly for tax reasons. So these are some of the strategic outcomes that are set out in the National Planning Framework. Compact growth. The document is very much centred on avoiding sprawl and having a compact approach to future development, focusing on the existing urban areas and particularly the larger cities. Enhanced regional accessibility, strengthen rural economies and communities, sustainable mobility, which is obviously something that Galway has to address. Strong economy supported by enterprise, innovation and skills, high quality international connectivity, enhanced amenity and heritage, and transition to low carbon and climate resilient society, sustainable management of water and environmental resources, and access to quality childcare, education and health services. So these are the I suppose the 10 strategic outcomes that are identified in the framework. They're not necessarily new. Quite a lot of these were contained in its predecessor, the National Spatial Strategy, but the level of success in implementation was poor, I think would be fair to say. So in terms of I suppose the most significant spatial element of the document is that 75% of all population growth is to occur outside of Dublin. And the main focus outside of Dublin is to be on the Cork, Limerick, Galway and Waterford. Now, towards the end of the period of preparation of the document, a number of additional urban centres were added. And there is a view that, I suppose, the political system has once again interfered in the preparation of this strategy. These were added very much at the 11th hour: Sligo, Athlone, Dundalk, Drogheda, and Letterkenny. So while the document wasn't going to, I suppose, designate urban centres in the same way that its predecessor did, that's effectively what we have. We have Dublin, we have the major urban areas outside of Dublin, and then we have a series of smaller urban centres. And obviously there's significant reference to the Atlantic Economic Corridor, which is increasing connectivity between Galway and the major centres such as Sligo, Limerick and Cork. And obviously the motorway between Limerick and Tuam is part of that Atlantic Corridor and part of that connectivity. So that's just a brief synopsis of the National Planning Framework, which, as I said, this is the initial high level. There's quite a lot yet to come. It remains to be seen whether there is sufficient commitment to the implementation, and let's hope that it will be more successful than its predecessor. So moving on then to the strategic housing development. This legislation was introduced in it was first drafted in 2016, came into effect in 2017, and its purpose was to try and fast-track residential development through the planning process. It applies to residential developments of more than 100 dwellings or student accommodation projects containing 200 or more bed spaces. It can also be utilised for mixed-use development, provided that the 85% of the development is residential, so you can't exceed, the non-residential component cannot exceed 15%. It's still relatively new. As I said, it only came into effect in the middle of 2017. It is a genuine effort by government to improve the to speed up the delivery of housing. And I suppose one of the most significant aspects of this new legislation is that for the first time ever, the planning process must now make a decision, and in Bortlanala must now make its decision on significant projects within a defined time frame. We've been told since the establishment of Bortlanala in 1976 that they couldn't be confined to time because these projects were too complex. Now we see a different approach where they are, and ultimately we'll have to see the same approach in the courts when it comes to decisions on or comes to challenges on planning applications. It has to be the case that these decisions are made within a defined time period. So it's divided into three stages. The strategic housing development process. Stage one is where is what you might describe as the pre-application stage. Stage 2 is a consultation period which involves consultation between the applicant for the development, the local planning authority, and An Bord Pleanála. I should have mentioned, by the way, that at the core of this this legislation is that the planning applications go directly to An Bord Pleanála, and the Bord Pleanála make the decision. But there is a significant role for the local planning authority. It's not unlike the legislation which was introduced in 2006 for strategic infrastructure. The difference is that under the strategic infrastructure legislation, there's no time limit on Bord Pleanála in terms of making its decision. In practice, the process, the strategic infrastructure process has not been a fast-track process. It avoids the appeal stage, but it hasn't been a fast-track process, whereas, as I said, the strategic housing legislation has defined, as you can see, stage 2 is the formal pre-application consultation period, which has a defined 9-week time frame, and then stage 3, which is the lodgement of the planning application, and that has a 16-week time frame. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but it just gives you an outline of the type of information that must be provided at various stages in the process, and the timelines for the provision of that information. So you commence the process by, you prepare preliminary documentation, you request a meeting with the local authority, your local planning office. You produce obviously a certain amount of information for that, and then following that you effectively engage with An Bord Pleanála, and there is a stage then where the 3 parties are involved in the process. And once you have gone through that initial 9-week period, stage 2, you lodge your application directly with the board. Again, is just an outline of the type of information that must be submitted at the various stages in the process. I'm not going to dwell on that. So the consultation, the stage 2 consultation meeting, review the planning rationale for the development, but it doesn't involve a merits-based assessment, and this is something that has caused some difficulty. I think it will iron itself out. It's very similar to the strategic infrastructure. Even though you are engaging with An Bord Pleanála, who will ultimately make the decision, they're not assessing the scheme that you're proposing at that point. They're simply determining whether or not your application is fit for purpose. And I think what has happened in a few projects to date is that certain issues that subsequently emerged when the application was made that maybe weren't highlighted at that stage have ultimately ended up in those projects having to be refused. But you know, it is a little bit of a weakness in the process. There's a reason for it, in that the board do not want to be seen to be giving a direction to the applicant, or indeed giving, you know, an indication as to whether or not a project will be successful at a very early stage, when other parties haven't had an opportunity to become part of the process. Again, these are just some of the time frames in the legislation, and one of the most important, I suppose, points on this slide is that there is no opportunity for An Bord Pleanála to seek further information. Again, there's a reason for it that was designed specifically to fast-track the process. The difficulty that has posed for both the applicants and the board is that if something arises in the course of their final assessment during that stage 3, that 16-week period, they don't have an opportunity to go back to the applicant and get that clarified. So it is early days. We're 7-8 months into this legislation, but just in terms of some of the I suppose the experiences to date, up until mid-December 2017, there were planning applications for 2,254 housing units had been declared invalid at pre-planning stage. The board was dealing with 13 planning applications that involved the construction of over 4,000 houses, apartments and student accommodation. The stage 2 consultation meeting will review the planning rationale. That's the point that I made, but does not involve a merits-based assessment. Obviously that has become evident. And there's no provision for the additional information or clarification. So to date, three cases had been determined by the board, or at the time of preparing this slide a few days ago. 2 out of those 3 applications had been refused, and for that particular reason that the board do not have the opportunity to seek further information to get these issues addressed. The application that has been successful was for a very large student accommodation development by UCD on their campus, and that one what was ultimately granted was significantly less than what was applied for. So I suppose if you were to look at it, 7 or 8 months in, you could take a view that it isn't doing what it set out to do. It's not delivering planning permission for houses as intended, as a fast-track process. But I think most of these issues will work themselves out over time. There will have to be an arrangement whereby the board can give greater direction to applicants at the pre-planning stage, because, as we've seen, relatively straightforward issues have emerged subsequently that resulted in the applications having to be refused. But I think overall this legislation is to be welcomed, and when it settles down, I think it will begin to deliver. It will begin to deliver permissions in a much shorter time frame. And the fact that, for the first time, as I said, for the first time ever, we have a defined time period in terms of making the planning application is something that we need to see implemented in other areas of the planning process. This was just yet another aspect of that legislation, which was to do with extension of duration of planning permissions. Existing planning permissions that had already been extended and where significant works had already been commenced. Again, all of these measures are designed to get the industry or improve the delivery of housing. So you can, in fact, get a further extension of up to 5 years for planning permissions of 20 houses or more, where substantial works had been carried out. Just recently, we've had regulations published that are set out or that make changes of use to residential use. Say if you had a vacant shop unit or a vacant office in towns and villages, you can now change to residential use, change it to an apartment without having to go through planning permission in certain circumstances. For the past 18 months or thereabouts, we will have seen several commentators identify opportunities in towns and villages throughout the country for the provision of housing in units that are vacant. They were previously shops, or in quite a lot of cases they had a former commercial use that is no longer taking place. So there are significant opportunities here, and it means that they can be converted without having to go through a planning process and without having to comply necessarily with all of the current requirements that apply to if you were going through the planning process. This is literally come into effect in the last couple of weeks, so we haven't yet seen how successful it's or otherwise it's going to be. And finally, just coming on to this question of I suppose the legal system, and I think it was your president earlier on that made reference to the fact that there are 2 cases being heard in a new court building in Limerick this week on judicial reviews of planning applications. This has become a major issue and a major delay for infrastructure projects in recent years. If you went back 15 years, 10 to 15 years ago, and you look at the statistics in terms of the number of projects where a judicial review was sought, in terms of whether they were successful in getting past stage 1, because a judicial review is a 2-stage process, and you find that approximately 20% of those who sought leave for judicial review would have been successful 10 to 15 years ago. Now, approximately 80% of all applications for leave for judicial review are successful. In other words, they're successful in getting into the process, into the courts process, and ultimately they may not succeed in preventing the project from going ahead, but it does cause a significant delay. And the project that has brought this very much to the fore recently, as I said, is the Apple project in Athenry, where it did go relatively smoothly through the planning process. The project did identify a weakness in the strategic infrastructure legislation, whereby in that instance the project had to be split in 2. Half of it, or one application, went directly to Galway County Council, and the other went to Bord Pleanála. And it was the bigger part that went to the local authority, in fact, and what you might call the smaller part, which was the power supply, that had to go to the board. But in any event, ultimately the board brought the 2 parts together, and planning permission was granted in August 2016. And it's been subject to a legal challenge since, a judicial review, which has seriously damaged Ireland's reputation as a place to invest and as a place to create employment. The government have asked the President of the High Court to look at the issue of judicial reviews, particularly in strategic infrastructure projects. So one step has already been taken in the last 3 or 4 weeks. There's now a dedicated High Court judge who sits every Thursday to hear applications for leave for judicial review. So that has, I suppose, speeded the process up. The government are considering reduced time periods in which to seek a judicial review. They're considering the prospect of reducing it from 8 weeks to 4 weeks. That may or may not succeed. I mean, you have to allow people at the same time, a reasonable opportunity where they have genuine grounds. And they are also considering the eligibility criteria for seeking a judicial review. As things stand, you can form a group or an organisation today and seek a judicial review of a planning decision tomorrow. They're considering the possibility of the entity that seeks a judicial review, if it's an organisation that's opposed to a development, having to be in existence for at least 3 years before they make the legal challenge. So we await further developments in that area, but it is, it's virtually now as big an issue as the planning system is in terms of major infrastructure projects. If you look at the number of applications that are subject to judicial review, it is significant. And that's just a very brief run through some of the recent developments that have taken place, in the planning process. But as I said at the outset, I think what it shows us, apart from the national planning framework, which is very welcome, and whether it's sufficiently ambitious or not is another day's work, but The rest of those provisions, I think, point to a planning system that is just creaking and is probably no longer fit for purpose and needs a major overhaul. At this point in time, and this has been acknowledged, in fact, by at pretty senior levels throughout in various state departments, we have one of the most complex planning systems in terms of trying to follow the legislation. And the reason for that is that you have a particular piece of legislation, there's a flaw identified in the process, and there's an amendment. And then there's another amendment and another amendment. So to get to the bottom of something or other, an issue or a query, you have to go through layers upon layers of legislation. And that in itself has given rise to or created opportunities for legal challenges. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, Shane.
Okay, our final speaker is Patrick King. Patrick King is the Associate Director and Head of BIM Technologies at ECD Architects in London. Patrick is a qualified architectural technologist graduating from GMIT and has over 10 years of experience within the construction industry. He holds a BSc Honours degree in BIM Management and completed an MSc at Middlesex University also in BIM Management. His experience in the construction industry has involved a variety of projects from small residential refurbishments to large new build, educational and sports stadium project developments. Patrick has a detailed understanding of BIM processes and Rivet architecture and expertise in the implementation and enforcement of BIM standards, as well as experience in the implementation of AEC BIM standards, PAS 1192 and project execution plans. Patrick, in this presentation, will present his experiences from his current work using BIM for social housing projects with Westminster Council in London.
Thank you very much. Today's presentation is going to be a brief introduction to ECD as a company, an overview of some of the standards, methods and procedures we have in place as an architectural practice. We're going to look at the implementation of BIM in the councils. So currently we are the BIM consultants for Westminster City Council in London. And then we're going to look at a pilot project, which is a social housing scheme based in central London. And it's going to be focused around the processes and procedures in delivering a project. Not so much about the modeling, but how we actually deliver a project in line with PAS 1192 documents. So just before we get started, just getting an idea of the audience. How many in the audience here is from a design team? Architects, engineers, structures, contractors? Any QSs? Brilliant. Brilliant. So ECD is part of an Enable group. Our sister companies are Keegan's and PPCR. We're made up of quantity surveyors, architects, building surveyors, project managers. And we come together and we have BIM champions in each of these departments which form our BIM consultancy. We're an award-winning design practice. We've just recently won the Swift Award this year for one of our refurbishment projects in Portsmouth. We work in a various amount of sectors: education, commercial, retail and residential. We have two offices. Our head office is in London, at London Bridge, and we have a second office in Glasgow. At the moment, our architectural division has over 45 staff members. We do a lot of work for charities and raising money. So just before Christmas, we ordered the Santa Run. I just about survived it. We hold quarterly bake-off competitions, which I've yet to win. I think I've been cheated out of it. And then we have also quarterly social events for all staff members. And every year then we come together as a complete organisation and we develop our business strategy. Everybody in the company has a say on how the company can develop and grow together. So 3 years ago, we made the decision to move into a BIM process way of working. Previous to that, they were maximising Rivet for producing traditional information, but we decided that that wasn't good enough. So we needed to look at a new way of working, a new way of sharing information, and become more efficient in the way that we deliver projects. So luckily enough, our managing director and all our directors bought in. We complete buy-in from the top down. Our managing director and all the directors across all the companies have just completed their BRE BIM Level 2 Essentials course. All our staff get 4 hours a month of rivet training, and then we have a BIM school for our staff members. So within 6 months of joining our company, we give you all the training you need, and then we send you out to do the rivet professional exams to give you the fundamental skills to produce the models and information, whether it's for a traditional project or for a BIM project, as Rivet is our selected software that we use. We've just launched our own ECD YouTube channel, where we're trying to create a virtual BIM manager for staff, so they can log on to it, get a video that can help them to sort out certain elements in the model, and show them how to do things that's required for that project. We've also got our own standards, methods, and procedure documents. How we validate models before they're issued, how we validate projects to see where the skill gaps within our staff members. So every week, our models are checked and validated using scripts within Dynamo BIM, and reports are issued back out to all our project architects where they need to revise the model, fix the issues before they move forward on and forward with that project. So when we look at the implementation of BIM within a council, about 12 months ago we won the framework to implement BIM within Westminster City Council. Westminster City Council has an estate portfolio of over 22,000 properties. Its value is in the region of 7 billion, and they're looking at a new construction spend of over $1 billion this year. So my role and my team's role is to implement BIM within the organisation, implement it and support design teams on all new projects coming up, and guide the contractors through certain stages where pilot projects are being tested to get an overall approach on that. So when we won the framework, we sat down with the client and we looked at what their business cases were. So within their City of All strategy, they identified 3 key areas that they want to develop on this year. They want to become a greener city, they wanted to become a smarter city, and they wanted to create a leaner construction process so they can maximise their budgets to provide more housing in the required areas. So we looked at creating an implementation plan, a strategy, a 5-stage plan of how we can implement this over a 4 to 5 year period. Currently we're between 3 and 4 right now. So the initial process was to analyse their current position in terms of their knowledge, infrastructure, and their expertise in embracing the BIM process. We looked at creating a BIM user group. Who are the key members that need to be involved in driving BIM forward in the future? What documents need to be created for standards, guidance, and reference materials? How are we going to engage the procurement teams and the legal teams and the finance teams? And then to look at pilot projects. What stages, what type of projects do we need to look at? So when we carried out the initial BIM assessment forms, we identified where they were, where we wanted them to be in a year, and where we wanted them to be in 5 years' time. And we set KPIs. In London and in England, councils love KPIs. It's how they measure success. Everything we do with Westminster City Council is measured with KPIs. So when we looked at the key members that needed to be part of the workshop group within Westminster City Council, we identified the asset management team was key, the legal team, the finance team, the project management team, the procurement and policy team. And they were all the key members we felt in the jigsaw to implement BIM across the organisation and on the projects. So we ran a series of workshops where we asked everybody what did BIM mean to them, how could they see BIM supporting them in their departments, what they feel was required to implement BIM. And we ran a series of workshops bi-weekly over the course of 4 months. And we slowly got to a process where we identified everything. How we're going to map it out, what needs to happen first, how we're going to get into projects, get into procurement, get the finances involved in it, and have an overall strategy for it. Then we were able to build a business case from that. The ask of why, the what, the how. Why should it be a BIM Level 2 project? What does that mean to the client? What does that mean to the asset management team, the finance team, the procurement team? and how was the design team and the contractors going to deliver this project. So we started to create their suite of documents, their standards and the guidelines to do this. We looked at their asset management strategies. We created them an employee information requirements document, which we tested. We sent out to the design team, we sent it out to contractors to get the feedback and to evolve and develop it over a series of months. We looked at process maps from a client point of view. How are they going to be cure projects? From the business case to the OG notices, to the PQQs, to the ITTs. How is BIM going to filter through that? How are they going to measure the capabilities of a design team to deliver a project within through BIM? We looked at the assessments and the matrix for scoring these responses. And then we tested it all out on the pilot project. So the pilot project is called Ashbridge Street. It's one of 6 that's running currently at the moment. For any of you that's not familiar with London, it's a 5-minute walk from Lord's Cricket. It's the easy way to describe it. It's a 26-unit new build scheme over 4 to 5 stories. A very complex site. There's a BT station located on it right now, and we identified the use of BIM as an ideal opportunity to understand what was going on by getting point cloud surveys and being able to interrogate the existing site as it stands. So we tested out the documents on that. We got ACD as the lead designer and their chain to populate self-assessment forms, to populate BIM execution plan, just to show them through that process, how it all works. As this is an early stage project, ACD were appointed from 0 to 4, and then the contractor takes it on from that stage onwards. So when we start down at the very beginning, the original appointment was for the architectural team and the quantity surveying team and project management. Now the reason I like this image is the 2 guys in the middle are the quantity surveyors. Because the biggest problem we have in London right now is an understanding of what an LOD is and what an LOI is. So the level of information, we all think that that's the management team should set it from the very beginning. It's the quantity surveyors that should be setting the level of information from the beginning. They're the guys that have to get the information out of the model for their cost plans, for their bill of quants. And you need to tell the design team how they're going to structure that inside your BIM model. Are you going to be using inner 1, inner 2? How is that going to be attached to the component? What specifications do you need? Architectural departments will model in zones. They will put a performance specification against it. Is that good enough for your level of information that you require for stage 2? So when we started to create these documents, we used MBS Toolkit as well as doing it the traditional way, just to see what the functionality of MBS was like. We created process maps, we created our execution plans, we created our matrix, our responsibility matrix. And then we looked at the workflow. The biggest challenge that the client had was an understanding of what was the benefit to the client at an early stage in BIM. What can I get out of it from a client's perspective? So when the finance teams were looking at the costs and the mixtures within the building, we wanted to give them a live feed to that information. So the design team created their zone of strategy, created their mass model. We extracted all that information through Dynamo and connected it up to Project BI. We put Project BI on a tablet and on the iPhones, and as the models were being developed, the clients were getting live updates on the mixtures and the costs and the implication as the footprint grew and the amount of units increased. We were able to see what the cost benefits were and what the negatives were from that. So we had early engagement right from the beginning. Everyone could see it live and it was constantly ongoing over the course of a couple of months. So we moved into stage 3 and stage 4. And we sat down again and we revised the execution plan. At this stage, we had the engineers, landscape architects, mechanical and electrical engineers all on board. So we looked at the model from the early stages. And then we started to revise our documents again. We started to look at task information delivery plans. We started to increase the model matrix plan. Who's going to be responsible for modeling what and when? And then we create our overall process map. So looking at the process map, it looks a bit crazy at the moment. So I've tried to simplify it there by color coding. So at the top we had the project managers with the quantity surveyors, and we had the process in the middle, and then the design team at the bottom. And then we linked in our task information program inside that process by mapping out the amount of weeks and the different milestones and when the different consultants are going to start them off. Because from what we had found in the past was that the architects, structural engineers, and mechanical electrical engineers were all starting the model at the same time. But the architects constantly changing designs, changing layouts, had a massive knock-on effect on the rest of the design team. Because the MEP models were moving up, they were moving down, ceiling voids were changing, floor thicknesses were changing, the models were constantly up and down, up and down. So we decided that the architects would have a 5-week head start on the rest of the consultants. So 5 weeks ahead of everybody else. By that stage, the design should settle a little bit, and then the rest of the consultants can start building them up. Because we had a zonal strategy in place from the start. The zonal strategy was key. You model within your zone, and you don't come out of your zone. Then we were able to measure the progress of the project through our task information review. We used the likes of Navisworks, and we used to compare the models from one meeting to the next meeting. These were our BIM coordination meetings, and before every meeting, the models were issued to the quantity surveyors. The quantity surveyors would check the model for the level of information, for the accuracy of the model, to see if they could extract that information at the end. Because what we didn't want to happen, we didn't want to get a situation at the end where the quantity surveyor says, I need 8 weeks to produce a cost plan or a bill of quants, and then 2 weeks into that validation process, come back to the design team, we need more, we need this, and we need that. We wanted to try and have a leaner process and how everyone worked together on it. So then we looked at how we were going to exchange that information, understanding the roles and responsibilities as outlined in PAS 11 and 92. Who is going to be the task team manager? Who is going to be the task information manager on the project? When the models were going to be shared, how often they were going to be shared. And we've mapped all that out within our execution plan, and we created process maps for that. And then that was validated at every coordination meeting we held. We looked at the progress of the project, the delivery of the project. One of the key areas that kind of gets overlooked a bit is the gateway, from the work in progress to the shared. Now, we've all seen the image in the background, so I've blurred it out. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about how we share that information, how we check that information. We can check it for the final implementation. Or are we actually checking the technical quality that's inside the model, that's inside the drawings, before we issue? Do we have to check, reviewed, approved, and refused folder structure on our local drivers? Have we got an audit trail of that? On a Friday evening when the project director is out with clients and the project architect, are they going to send that drawing out without getting checked by somebody else enough? What's your backup? If you don't have a senior member of staff to check a drawing, you're going to pass it to somebody else to check it. Because sometimes when we work on a project for so long, we get lost in a drawing, we get lost in a model. It's always good to get a colleague to check it before you issue it. So when we look at the validation of information, and what we've done with our own cost consultants internally, is we've sat down with them and we've tried to understand their role and what they do on a project. Because as designers, sometimes we get lost in that. We're so focused on what we do, we're like the cost consultants are the enemy. They're trying to kill our designs by budgets and say you can't afford that. So what we got them to do was we got them to create Rivet templates for us. So our cost consultants provide us with Rivet templates for InnoRim 1 and InnoRim 2. As design teams, them templates get loaded into your model. Any fields aren't populated come up red. So as you're building the model, you can see what information you're missing from a QS point of view. As a quantity surveyor, you can bring the models into your file, and you can gauge where the design team are with their information delivery. And we try to map all this out inside our documents and our process and standards. Because we've learned it's a lot easier to get it right from the start than try and fix it halfway through. When you're 2 weeks off from a deadline and you have to go back and fix the model and edit the model, it's a lot more difficult to do that. We use the Kobe plugin to extract the information from the asset management point of view. But really, what does an asset management team need at stage 2 and stage 3 of a project? They're more focused from the construction stage onwards point of view. They want to know expiry dates, warranty dates, health and safety information. Then we have our own design coordination strategy and cash validation. So we hold monthly coordination meetings on all our projects, where the design team and the client attend the meeting. We try to provide complete transparency on all our projects, because we're all learning together. We have independent meetings with our clients to give them the training to navigate around the model, so they can open up the models at any time and check the models and show their colleagues in their offices the model. Then when we look at the delivery of information, what's required at the end? We're required to provide the model, native file, IFC file, but we still have to extract the 2D information from that. Now currently within Westminster City Council, there in the next 6 months, along with submitting your drawings, you're going to be submitting your river model as part of planning. So they can review the river model and look at it from a solar study point of view, look at what is the impact of that building in that area. We have to produce schedules from the model, details from the model, asset information requirements from the model. So what we've started to do is we've started to harvest all that information to recycle it from other social projects. Because the reason is that on a social residential scheme, the only difference will be the exterior build-ups. Internally, they will have a gold, silver and bronze standard for floor types, floor finishes, ceilings, internal walls, doors. The very slight variation between it. So what we've looked at is how can we use all the information that we've created in the past, all the lessons learned from the past, and speed up a process. So what we've done and tested is we've 2 projects of similar size. We've delivered one using BIM, the other one traditional, but still building the river model. And we've found that we've created and produced information 2 weeks faster by delivering it through BIM, by harvesting all that information. Because once we start building the model, all our schedules are populated in the background automatically, or our specifications preset, maybe with some tweaks and changes along the way in relation to cost. And then we validate all of that delivery using Dynamo BIM, using the MBS toolkit, and training the client to understand how to navigate around the model so they can validate it in their own style, in their own process. So in conclusion, what we've learned from the overall process is we need to understand what PAS 1192 is asking us to do. We need to understand the roles and responsibilities in terms of information management, chassis management. We need to understand a zone and strategy approach. Get it right from the beginning. We need to understand how to validate and exchange information. Not be afraid to have an open source. As designers and design teams, we need to change the way we work. We have a tendency to leave the specifications and the constructability ideas to the last, to the very end. We say that wall is going to be 400 mil, but we don't know what's going to be inside it. Our thought process has to be different. what BIM allows us to do, it allows us to build a virtual building from the start. So when we're designing, we have to think about the design, the functionality, but also the constructability. So if you're using Revit and you're designing a model at stage 3, stage 2, if it throws up a warning saying it's not correct, it means it can't be built out. Address the warnings, address the issues. We need to have complete engagement from everybody in understanding the model and understanding the process around BIM. We have found that by using BIM models at design team meetings, the quantity of areas start asking questions. They're no longer the guys that sit down, fight for 2.5 hours to get their half an hour slot at the end, and that's it. They're engaged with the model. They're asking the key questions. Why? Why is that there? That's going to have a cost impact. Everybody can see what's going on. But there's a tendency in the industry to afraid to show the client too much information, because they're going to ask too many questions too early. Sharing knowledge and training as a team is key. It's critical to a project. It's critical to a delivery. To make them work, we must have an open source. We must learn from one another as a team, and we must train together. Train the client, train the architects, train the engineers, train whoever's on that project to upskill them. Not be afraid to share the knowledge, to share the templates, to share the experience. And if we can do that, we can have a faster delivery. We can have a better quality of information. We can actually achieve what the government's strategy for 2025 is. Stop working in silos. Improve the process. Let's not reinvent the wheel. That's what we look to get from BIM as a company. Thank you.
Okay, so we just have some time at the end for some questions for our 3 speakers. So it's open to the floor. Okay. Over there. Do you need a mic? I don't think we have a microphone, so yeah. Sorry, can we just silence please for questions?
Is there anything in the pipeline that's going to change? Do you know if there's anything in the pipeline that's coming out that's going to speed up that process? Like Patrick mentioned there, the use of the Revit model into Westminster Council for validating, as we're starting projects. Anything on the charts here?
Yes, we're very close to being allowed to lodge planning applications electronically. So I suppose that's some improvement in terms of getting rid of the paper. And I suppose once you're into electronic lodging, the planning application, the issue of numbers of copies, stones, all that. But it's something that is urgently required.
Do you think that might happen in the next year? Or?
Oh yeah, it's very close. It's very close. The time frame is it's certainly this year. I don't know exactly what it is. It's on the. I mean, we have to hire a bank to lodge planning application with an environmental impact assessment and corporate assessment, and that's not an exaggeration. That's the amount of paperwork that's involved. I mean, the environmental impact assessment can be a number of volumes in big folders, and then appropriate assessments or mature impact statements is equal in size, and we regularly have to submit 10 to 15 copies. It's crazy in the present times to do this. So it's on the way. There's a committee that have responsibility for bringing it in the coming months.
Thank you. Any other question? Justin here.
Just a quick question there, Ross, there in relation to the whole planning system. Pre-planning consultation meetings is, kind of a basic thing that everybody must have either goes through housing development use, it has to go through that presentation of the local authority. Is there anything that would you see legislation that would be time frame set for that? Certainly, if there are no time frame set for that, that mere step alone can delay a project like that.
Well, I suppose you're not obliged to have pre-planning consultation, but it's very advising. Under the strategic housing legislation, there are defined timeframes, and that's one of the positives in that legislation. Now, if the local planning authority if you don't get a response within 2 weeks of your request, you can actually move on without it. So it's not a great idea, but there aren't any proposals to introduce a timescale for planning outside of that process, unfortunately. And it is post-satisfactory, as are a lot of aspects of our process, but that one is particularly expensive.
Okay, Noel?
I have a question for Patricia. Patricia mentioned under the infrastructure of raising the house building and the product. I just wondered, the planning commission, how do you feel about the house to be built away? Would be more inclined to the planning commission or not inclined to the planning commission?
Okay, I suppose what I should say, these are different aspects of the board. But you wouldn't do it in isolation. You have to show how it's going to impact on land around it and so on. It might be just kind of one tweak at the end of the project that more level would have to have to be in relation to the water table and the pipe drains and rivers and so on. But it's only like one aspect.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a solution or it's just responsibility. It's just the rates done and where it's not done, that wouldn't work. But it's an aspect that has to consider within the overall process. If you want to add more with me or anything.
No, it's probably looking at from kind of like a visual aspect point of view, if you do an EIS for a housing station for a building and for the planning and the rate for everything, the rate high to the building, always constantly keep that planning department.
Okay, well I suppose from a visual like that, it certainly wouldn't be managed that it would be a change, but in terms of government and the original by 100 million might be a big difference to renting discovery, but it would be a big difference visually as well. So interesting point. Thanks, Sarah.
Any other questions? Yeah, at the back.
Two questions actually. One, just to Patricia, Gus had already mentioned the fact that he saw a need for further information to become part of the SHD process. Is there any plans with the board to develop that?
Well, I suppose we all are guided by the legislation that's set out, and the legislation doesn't have that provision in it as we stand. So, as Gus said, like perhaps as it evolves, perhaps that we need, maybe recognize that there is a need, and maybe at the government level, the legislation, the planning legislation is always changing, and that certainly may come forward as lessons learned. But there's nothing at the moment, and it's not a decision the board can take or make.
Well, I presume, if we take the example of the Safe Farm decision in Dublin, houses, not houses, and that primarily was a flooding issue, wasn't it? There's a lot, I was in there, and it's not something that I worked on, so I probably can't even answer the question specifically on that. So I think it was something that was tagged as pre-consultation, and I think the board felt it wasn't fully addressed, and therefore rejected it. It seems to be a very fundamental issue that had the board recognised that and had it been flagged within a further information process would have helped greatly in that process, that standing through. And I guess the other question I have is just maybe to Patricia and to us is in terms of viability. Does viability ever form, or do you see viability ever forming part of a decision process where obviously a local area plan may well say we want a mix of 1 beds to 5 beds, but the viability of the site may not be the market just doesn't want 1 bed to 2 beds in that location. And therefore densities are very difficult to achieve, and because of that you can't always meet the criteria laid down with the local area plan. But it prohibits development because the market doesn't want what the local area plan would look for.
I mean, that's a big issue at the moment, in fact. Probably more so now than it ever has been in my experience in the planning process, where the market is saying, or the advisors in the market are telling developers that houses are the most saleable commodity, 3-bedroom semi-detached houses in a lot of cases. And apartments, are not viable for a whole range of reasons to do with building control and what you can actually sell them for. So, there is a view that you can throw apartments for very little money because you don't have an individual plot or site for each. But in actual fact, apartments are not viable outside of Dublin. They're just not viable for the most part. But the planning system is now directing applicants to go for higher densities, and the only way you can achieve higher densities is by a different form of housing, which involves apartments and duplexes. So it is a big issue from a viability point of view, but I don't see any way out of this if we are going to achieve higher densities, and everything that we've heard today, including the National Planning Framework, is directing development towards existing centres rather than develop brownfield sites as opposed to greenfield sites and pushing the densities up. And the only way we want to do that is by exploring alternatives to conventional housing, and that will include house types that maybe developers don't consider to be viable.
The question here in the front.
Yeah, I'm thinking slightly off the theme as regards to solar farms. There's no specific strategy or certain requirements for solar farms benefit from 4 and what's up to 10. Do you know if there is anything in train as regards to specific guidelines and how owners will be?
I'm not aware that there are any plans to introduce in the short term, at least, guidelines for solar farms. They probably will come, as they did for wind and other sectors in time. For example, in the area of wind energy, the guidelines specify noise parameters, separation distance from housing. In other words, they deal with what are the planning implications for people in communities and how do you deal with those. But there aren't any immediate plans that are proposals that I'm aware of this morning.
Okay, I'm going to conclude by I'll ask one question for Patrick there in relation to the Westminster project. Is facilities management as part of that after the block is built? Has that been looked at?
What we have in the UK with managing the asset. Yes, they're part of it, and they're managing small elements of their property. Westminster City Council have very much for the contractors to manage their assets for them. So what we're trying to do right now is that get the contractors that's managing the portfolio, engaging the customer. So Westminster is trying to become more of a proactive instead of reactive situations and looking at costs. That's kind of one of the driving factors behind it, the system portfolio. We start to create certain chimneys within the ribbon walls that are being created. And I'd like to see plans and that we can start to calculate outside the costing and we start to map out their expenditure throughout the year, 5 years, 10 years, in a certain future.
Maintenance and so forth.
Yeah, so the costing focus on the right costing into that. And then the asset management team can start doing condition survey information against the market.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to conclude this session. Very interesting session. I can see the number of questions and the interest in the programme. Very informative presentation. So I'd like to thank the 3 speakers again in the usual manner.